Do we have sound now? Okay, are we back? Can we hear? Okay, yay! Thank the Lord. Literally, let's bow our heads and we will pray and we will begin our Q&A session. Always a couple technical glitches. Technology, what else can we do? So let's bow our heads. Lord, thank you for being with us and allowing the sound to finally work, and be with us as we open your word and answer all the questions that everybody has. In your name we pray, amen. So it's so nice to be here with everybody. Looks like there might be a slight delay from when I'm talking and hearing to when you can hear me, but as long as we can see, we can get this working. Okay, so for our first episode question of the night, we are going to answer a question about, we're going to go back. Where could the Ark of the Covenant be, or what happened to it after the destruction of the first temple? So this question came up, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Ark of the Covenant itself. So the Ark of the Covenant itself, we can find this in Exodus 25:10. And it says in Exodus 25:10 that the ark was 1.5 cubits wide, it was 2.5 cubits long, and it was 1.5 cubits in height. The Ark of the Covenant was actually composed of two different pieces. The pieces were the upper mercy seat that had the angels on either end, and then the box, the ark portion. It was also called the Ark of the Testimony, and the two pieces together formed one whole unit. According to the Bible in Exodus 25, this was made based on a pattern that was given to Moses. And if we read in Hebrews 8:5, it is a shadow of heavenly things according to a pattern that was shown to Moses. If we go to Thayer's definition of shadow, definition B is an image cast by an object and representing the form of that object. So this is a representation of an object. And it becomes clear what that means if we go to the next verse in Hebrews, that is Hebrews 9, not the next verse, the next chapter. This is chapter 9, verse 23. It says, "It was therefore necessary that the pattern of things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices." So this tells us that there were actually two arks, one that was on earth and another that was in heaven. So this answers one of the potential theories that the Ark of the Covenant had been taken to heaven. According to Hebrews 9:23, there was one here on earth and there was one in heaven. So now we're going to go through and we're going to look at Revelation 11:19. This is the verse that a lot of people mistake the Ark of the Covenant that was here on earth as being taken to heaven. But we know from the previous verse that that is not the case. So when we're looking at the timeline movement of the Ark of the Covenant. This is where we're going to see and be able to track its movements. So sometime around 1464 BC, it is made at Mount Sinai. It is then placed at Shiloh in Joshua 18, 1 through 2, and it stays there for quite some time. Then Eli's sons take it into battle, and the Philistines captured it. So after the Philistines captured it, the Philistines had it for 7 months. And during these 7 months, they put it in the house of their God. Their God was destroyed. The people were hit by a plague. They sent it back to the Israelites and said, please take this off of our hands. The Israelites didn't have as much respect for it as they should have, and they all decided to take it back inside, which they knew was against the laws according to all the way back at Mount Sinai. The only people that were supposed to be having anything to do with the ark at all were the Levites. So then there was a plague at the Israelite dwellings, and the Ark of the Covenant was housed in Kirjath Jearim for the next 20 years. And for that 20 years, it stayed there. Then it was brought to Jerusalem. And once it was brought to Jerusalem, it was placed in the first temple by King Solomon, and it resided there for a very long time until it disappeared, which was shortly before the Babylonian destruction. So what happened to it during that time span from the Babylonian, before the Babylonian destruction, to when it disappeared? Some people might think, hey, they've seen the movies. It's in a warehouse somewhere. It's not in a warehouse somewhere. I can guarantee you that. There is a church in Ethiopia that claims that they have the real Ark of the Covenant, based on their traditions. The Queen of Sheba and King Solomon had a child. That child then later went to go visit his father in Israel. And when he went back, he took the Ark of the Covenant with him, and a copy was placed in the temple there in Jerusalem. I do not believe this story for a number of reasons. The main reason is that there's two different versions. One says that he stole it, and I do not believe that God would have allowed his Ark of the Covenant to be stolen without severe consequences, simply for touching the Ark after it had been at his dwelling place for 20 years. Uzzah was struck dead instantly. The Israelites knew what was supposed to happen. They were hit by a plague. The Philistines were hit by a plague. We don't see any of these incidences occurring on its supposed trek from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. And if it had been stolen, we could expect to see that. And I don't see Solomon giving the holy place of God, his place where his presence dwelt between the cherubims, to his son and send it far away from Israel, because that was Israel's protection. So I do not believe the stories that say, hey, this is now in Ethiopia. There is some evidence that the prophet Jeremiah, shortly before the destruction, knowing that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, took all of the original pieces of furniture from the sanctuary tabernacle that Moses had directed and shown the people all of the patterns for, that Jeremiah took those and he went through the caves with their priests and the Levites and hid the Ark of the Covenant under the caves in Jerusalem. This is supported by accounts in the Maccabees. The Maccabees are traditional writings that do not contain total and complete truth. The Maccabees book said that they took it, far away from Jerusalem. I don't believe that, but one of the things that was recorded in the Maccabees was that as they went, they carved angels or cherubim along the way to mark the path of where they took the ark. We do know that there are caves under Jerusalem, which would have made it very easy for Jeremiah to slip the Ark of the Covenant and the temple furniture out of. One potential cave site is the Jeremiah's grotto, or the caves of Zedekiah. And in these caves of Zedekiah, there has actually been found carvings of cherubim in the walls of the caves. Now, this carving that you're going to see on your screens on the right, it was chiseled out from the cave in 1874 and taken to the British Museum in London. Now, the cave of Zedekiah, as we're looking, this is where they believe that the Temple Mound was. The caves go underneath or close by to where the Temple Mound is, over to the wall of Jerusalem, very close by to what is known as the Garden Tomb. So there is a cave system that goes under this whole area, and it was very likely that that is where the ark is residing. Not too far, because we know that Jeremiah was there present in Jerusalem when all of these events were occurring, as Jerusalem is, the people there are being captured and taken away. So Jeremiah doesn't, disappear and go hundreds of miles away. He is present there. So it would make sense that under his direction, the ark was just simply secreted away into one of these caves. But we actually have no archaeological evidence of the ark after the destruction of Babylon. In the Babylonian records, they recorded what they brought to Babylon from Jerusalem. There is no record of the Ark of the Covenant or the original temple furniture. Now, there is a record of some of the extra stuff that was made by King Solomon when he built his first temple there. But as far as the originals that came from Mount Sinai, the Babylonians did not record those in their records. So I hope that answers your question. The next question is, explain the difference between Jew, Hebrew, and Israelite. So this is something that people think that you could use all three interchangeably, but not necessarily. So let's look at Hebrew first. Hebrew is a descendant of Eber. In the New Testament, he's called Heber. It is closely associated with the worship of God. When we're looking at the lineage from Abraham back to Shem, there are 10 generations. The son of Shem was Arphaxad, then Selah, then Eber. And Eber is where we get the term Hebrew from. This was indicating that Abraham was following the belief system of his ancestor, Eber, who was worshiping the one true God. And we can see this when we're looking at some of the Hebrew descendants. Abraham and Nahor are listed as following the God of their fathers and worshiping the one true God. When we're looking at the people later on, Bethuel and Laban, they're not following the true God. They're worshiping idols. They have multiple gods. We see this with Laban, who sent, looking for his daughter because she stole his gods. We also have where Terah is listed as not worshiping the gods of his father. And what is an interesting point with that is Abraham did not take the name of the gods or the cities around him. He didn't take the name of the land. He decided to be known as a descendant of a God-fearing individual, whereas people like Laban and Esau and Lot's descendants, they chose to be either known as by the land, so Laban the Syrian, or they decided to create their own system, such as the Ishmaelites, the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, and we know that these people groups decided to be polytheistic and worship multiple gods. So Hebrew, all of these individuals that are on the screen right now are Hebrews. Did they choose to associate themselves with Eber? And we're looking back, and it would appear as if some of them did and some of them didn't. Abraham was known as a Hebrew. So a Hebrew is any descendant of Eber, but is closely associated with worship of the one true God. Israelite references a descendant of Jacob. So a descendant of Jacob, Jacob had 13 children, and he adopted Joseph's 2 sons as his own. When we look at all of these children put together, we have the basis of the 12 tribes in Israel. And Jacob's name, it became Israel, and all of his descendants through these children were called the children of Israel or Israelites. And we can read about that in Genesis 29, 32 through 30, and Genesis 35, 18. Now, there's actually 2 different types of Israel and Israelite, and that can also be one of the member of the 12 tribes, and this also ties into Jew, which is a slang term. And here is a better way to look at it. After Solomon died, we had a unified kingdom under David and Solomon. But when Solomon died, his son decided that he did not want to be a good king, and he was going to really lay down the law with his people. And the people didn't like that very much, so there was a split in the kingdom. We ended up with the 10 northern tribes, also known as Israel. Then we ended up with the 2 southern tribes of Judah and the Levites, which technically weren't a tribe. They were supposed to be scattered amongst all of the tribes, but the Levites tended to align themselves with Judah. So the term Jew ended up being a shortened form or a slang form. Originally, it's thought that it may have been a derogatory term, but it was eventually embraced to define the Jewish people as a particular nation. We see this in Esther and Ezra and Nehemiah, and by the time we get into the New Testament, that it is a very common reference. All right. Question number 3. A certain famous podcaster talked about Gilgamesh and Nimrod this week. Was he a giant? That's interesting. We talked about giants and the Nephilim last week. So I think that it must have been a theme that was going on. So we can look at Gilgamesh. We're going to learn more about Gilgamesh tomorrow during our Noah presentation tomorrow evening. But Gilgamesh is a Mesopotamian myth. It's considered one of the oldest existing myths, a very similar story to the flood. And we have a statue of Gilgamesh. We have several of them. This one is the most popular. And the one thing that I want to point out is the fact that Gilgamesh is holding a lion. This lion, you'll see it has a full mane. And what we know about lions and their manes is that the mane doesn't come in until the lion is full grown at around 3 years old. That is when a lion will get his full, lovely mane, and a full-grown lion currently stands at about 4 feet at his shoulder. So if we look at this statue of Gilgamesh and we do some very rough measurements, this is some just very rough measurements of the shoulder to the knee to the paw, and we take those and we lay out them on this grid that we have here. And each one, it equals about 0.74 inches. We take those and then we stack them on top of one another. Each one of these full orange bars represents a full-grown lion height at approximately 4 feet. So it would be approximately 4 feet, 4 feet, 4 feet, 4 feet, and then half of one of the segments, which is 2 feet. So 4, 8, 12, 16, 18. So based on this statue, if it's to scale, we're looking at an individual who is approximately 18 feet tall. Now, was he actually that height? I cannot tell you for certain, but based on the evidence that we have through these carvings and these statues, it would appear that yes, Gilgamesh, some people call him Nimrod, was a giant. All right, question number 4. Did Noah and Abraham meet? This is a very interesting question. It is right on topic with what we will be talking about coming up tomorrow and over the course of the next few Sabbath evenings. So when we're talking about Noah and Abraham, what we're actually talking about is we're talking about the Table of Nations and the first 300 to 400 years after the flood, when everybody is deciding where they're going to go and they're setting up the first kingdoms of the world, the first cities, they're making the lines and the borders. So this is very important when it comes to knowing who is still alive, who is moving where. When we are tracking this, we can actually go to Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis 11 to determine how old people were. If we look at Genesis 5, we get the history from Adam all the way through to the flood. This gives us about 1,656 years after creation to when the flood occurred. We know that Noah was 600 years old at the time of the flood. Now we switch over to Genesis chapter 11, and that tells us the next 10 generations, which go from Shem all the way down to Abraham. So when we're looking at how old the individual was when their child was born. And if we calculate that, we can calculate exactly, when Noah died in comparison with when, Terah was born, when Eber was born, who had the opportunity to hear firsthand the stories of before the flood and what life was like right after the flood, and somebody who had literally spoken with God. So we can determine that from creation to Abraham when he was 75 years old was only 2,083 years from creation. Now, there are 2 points that I want to make note of. Noah actually wasn't 500 years old when Shem was born. So this is something that when you're looking at Genesis 5, it says, and Noah was 500 years old and he had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. We have to look at Genesis 11 to determine this. So at Genesis 11, it says that Shem was 100 years old 2 years after the flood. Now, 2 years after the flood, Noah would be 602. So if Noah was 602, 2 years after the flood, we subtract the 100 years old that Shem was when his son was born, and we determine that Noah was actually 502 when Shem was born. The other thing that I want to note when we're looking at, calculating ages based on Genesis 5 and Genesis 11 is Terah's age and Abraham. So to do this, we're going to look at Genesis 11:32. where it says that Terah was 205 years old when he died. Then we're actually going to go to Acts 7:4 and Genesis 12:4. This tells us that after Terah died, Abraham, at the age of 75, was told, Abraham, I want you to leave this land. I want you to go to the land that I'm going to tell you, and I will make you a great nation. So if Terah is 205 when he died, and Abraham is 75 years old when his father dies, and he's told, okay, your father has died now I want you to go down to the land of Canaan. That means that Terah was actually 130 years old when Abraham was born, not the 70 that is recorded in Genesis 11. That would have been one of the other three sons that is mentioned. And we see this with both Noah and with Terah because three individual children were listed. They listed the age of the father at his first son's birth. Whereas with all of the other sons and all of the other fathers that are listed, it was always if that age was given, then it was that particular son being born. But because these two sets of three individuals were so important to the story of Genesis, they had to make some distinctions, and Moses went ahead and he just listed the age of the father at the eldest son's birth. So Abraham was not the eldest son, he was a middle son. Same thing with Shem. Shem was not the eldest son, he was a middle son, and there were reasons for that, but I'm not going to get into those tonight because it could go a little bit more in depth, and we'll be talking about some of this in the upcoming seminar. So Genesis 11:26 is where we get the age of Terah at his eldest son's birth. But if you add up all of these ages, it gives us an approximation of how old Noah was when Abraham was born. And based on the timetables that we have, we know that Noah actually died 2 years before Abraham was born. Almost made it, but not quite. Shem lived almost the entire lifespan of Abraham. And actually, Eber, whom Abraham called himself Abraham the Hebrew, Eber actually outlived Abraham by several years. So the founding father of the Hebrews was actually still alive after Abraham had died. And we can see that the lifespan was shortened dramatically after the flood. The first three generations, we had individuals that were living, 400 years, and then around the time of the Tower of Babel, that time span was cut about in half, with 240 to 200, and then slowly going down. And we see with each successive generation after that, it just continues to go down until we're around the 120s, where it stays for some time. All right, so this is just some information about, Abraham and who lived when. I did want to mention, in case you didn't hear it earlier, we are doing a live archaeology file seminar about Noah's Ark. This is part of our archaeology files series. This particular seminar that we're going to be running is going to be running the month of February, and this is all about Noah's Ark, the hunt for Noah's Ark, the stories that surround it, what artifacts have been found, information about some of the different sites that have been investigated, who Noah was, the people, the animals, anything and everything that you could possibly want to know about Noah's Ark. We will be going over It's going to be a 4-week-long seminar. It might go into 5 or 6 weeks, depending on how many questions are being asked, because this is a live seminar, and I want to make sure that we are interactive and are answering any questions that you might have. Okay, are there any questions tonight that we can answer? I do apologize for our earlier audio issues that we were having. Do we have any questions for tonight? I will be happy to answer any questions that we have for tonight. I know it's been a very, very long and cold week. We actually, the water froze, and it's interesting to think about, we find these things very inconvenient now, but shortly after the flood, they would have been dealing with some very dramatic weather changes, and I certainly would not have wanted to have been part of those dramatic changes in the weather right after the flood and the months that were leading up to the flood. So that's something that we all need to think of, I think, when we are approaching Scripture, is that these were real live people. They weren't just characters in a storybook. They were actually living these lives. And it's very important to recognize that they weren't perfect individuals. They had personalities. Some of them were funny. Some of them were maybe not the best person that you wanted to have hanging around, but that's what makes each individual unique and human. And it brings a different perspective. And reading some of the writings from the Bible, comparing that with the traditions, and we can get a much larger picture of what's going on. I particularly like looking at commentaries and dictionaries and books that talk about specific customs of the day that actually, why did they do that? And we've totally lost that knowledge today, but it's been preserved somewhere. It's like, oh, that's why they did that. That makes total and complete perfect sense now. So I like looking through those. All right, we have a question that says, I've heard that there are fossils on tops of mountains from the flood, including fossils of whales. Could you dive into this? So, yes, totally. Let me actually bring up, I have some slides that are on fossils. So let me bring up those slides on the fossils. So during the flood, and this is something that we will be getting into as we are discussing our flood program, but during the flood, everything was under the water. There wasn't a surface on the planet that was not under water. And the tallest mountain that we have today is Mount Everest. And let me see if I can find those slides, because it's a really cool picture of Mount Everest. You're going to get a slight sneak peek at what we're going to be discussing. Here we go. So let's do a slideshow from the current slide. So this is a mountain as they're climbing it. These are some of the fossils that you can find on the tops of these mountains. This is from the Rocky Mountains up in Canada. And she is holding what are known as trilobites. And what's interesting about trilobites is that they are not a surface creature. They're more like under the water. You might find them in the dirt. They're a lower level. So that would indicate that at some point, all of the mountains in the world were at the bottom of the ocean, not just on the top, but at the bottom. And their height today, some people debate, were they as tall? There are some geologic formations that have occurred after the flood, because during the flood, everything was shifting. It was going back and forth. And we do know that as the plates collide with one another, there are rises in the surface level. As volcanoes go off, it actually builds entire island systems, which is why we have places like Hawaii and the islands in Indonesia. So there's a lot of land that has been lost. There's a lot of land that has been gained. But because they are finding these fossils on the tops of the mountains, it means that, yes, everything was absolutely covered in water. And not only that, but the fossils that they are finding are closed. So like with these mollusks and clams, when the animal would normally die, the animal would release its muscles and the shell would open. And what we're actually finding with all of these is that the shells are not opened. The shells are closed, which indicates that it was a very rapid burial. So not only were these mountains underwater, it wasn't a slow build. It was a very rapid build. And we can also see where these mountains were not solid, but were more like liquid at the time that some of this was going on. So like these folded mountains, they weren't just, if you took a brick and a piece of clay and you smash them against one another, it's not going to mold to one another. It's going to shatter. Whereas with these mountain ranges, what we're actually seeing with some of them is that it was like they're being pushed, but it's Play-Doh, it's clay, where they're molded based on how they were being pushed, the wave direction, all these different forces that are going on. And we can see in some of them wave patterns. This one is a picture if you've ever driven through Western Maryland. This is actually one of the most famous mountain cutaways that you can find in the United States. It's called Sidling Hill on I believe it's Interstate 68 as you're headed west. And it is a wonderful example of some of this folded and flowing rock formations that we have. Yes, love to see the collection of the seashells. You can find seashells everywhere, and because you're finding seashells everywhere, that does prove that yes, there was water that was in these different areas. And we do find whale fossils in the middle of the desert. I believe it was over near the Sahara that they found 12 or 20 plus ginormous whale fossils that were in the middle of the desert, which proved that at one point the desert had actually been a very large body of water that just simply doesn't exist anymore. And for fossilization, not only was it a large body of water, but there had to be certain factors such as debris masses that were floating, lots of pressure that would compact those fossils down and prevent carrion or scavengers from eating the carrion. So I hope that answers your question about rocks and fossils. It's not too in-depth right now. We will get more in-depth if you want to join us later in February, or go back and look at a later date, because all of our programs will be archived on YouTube. All right, we've got another question. Is the Eastern Wailing Wall in Jerusalem part of the Second Temple, or could it be remains of another building? Oh, it looks like I didn't see any, I didn't show you any of these slides. Let me go back real quick and show you some of these slides, because that makes the whole. So here we go. So this is the mountain range with the fish fossil where they're finding it, and I don't see any fish swimming up here. It's glaciers and solid ice. And underneath of the ice is where they're finding some of these. This is from the Rocky Mountains with the trilobite fossils that they're finding. This is the bivalve clamshell that they're finding. Almost always they are closed, and there's thousands of them. This is the folding of the rocks, where it almost looks like it was Play or Play-Doh that was being pushed around and as the rock formations were moving. And then this is a picture of Sidling Hill. All right. So, question: is the Eastern Wailing Wall in Jerusalem part of the Second Temple, or could be remains of another building? So this is an interesting question. The reason that it is interesting is because there is a very large debate on exactly where the temple sat. Most scholars believe that we still have the remnants of the walls of the temple, and that, you can go and you can walk where Jesus walked along the same streets. But as an archaeologist, I believe that it's in the general vicinity of where the temple stood. However, do I feel that the walls that currently exist that are being shown are the actual walls from the temple in Jesus's day? So here are some pictures that I want to go over with you, and some Bible verses that lead me to believe that the walls that we are seeing now are not the ones that existed during the days of Jesus. So when we're reading in Matthew and Mark and Luke, this is some of the most famous verses where the disciples are looking at the temple and they're saying, "Oh, wow, isn't this so cool? And isn't this so great? And don't we have the best of everything here? Everybody should be envious of us." And Jesus is looking at the temple that they're walking through, and he says, "See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." And a lot of the people that you talk to believe that this was solely in reference to the temple, and that the foundation walls weren't meant. It was literally just the temple and the temple buildings. But if you go back to Luke 19:41 through 44, we see that there's an event that is going on, and Jesus is getting ready to enter Jerusalem in the triumphant entry. And as he is looking over the city of Jerusalem before he enters it, he beholds the city, and he wept over it, saying, "Thine enemies shall lay thee even with the ground, and not leave in thee one stone upon another." So what was he predicting here? Was he weeping over the temple, or was he weeping over the entire city? And when he is talking here in Luke, he is not talking about the temple. He is talking about everything. The walls of the city, the temple, the buildings, the palaces, every single thing in the city. And then they go into the city. They're in the temple area, and the disciples are making their comments, and he repeats himself in regard to the temple and giving the same prophecy. There's going to be nothing left. So when we're looking at things like the Western Wall and the Eastern Wall, and they're like, "Oh, come here and see where Jesus walked and the upper room. It is of my opinion that none of those things were in existence at the time of Christ. These are things that were built later on, much, much later on. This is some of the information showing you what Herod's temple may have looked like. We've actually found, pieces of the facade, and it was beautifully decorated. We know that Titus burned Jerusalem. This is a picture of them carrying away some of the items from within the temple. We know that he did not originally want to destroy the temple, but because it was so much gold there, somebody stuck their head in, saw the gold, dropped the torch, and the rest is history. Later on, that gold and all of the things that they got from destroying Jerusalem was actually used to build the Colosseum, which is ironic because they used items from God's house to try to kill God's people. But here's an interesting quote from Josephus. This is from the Jewish War, Book 7, Chapter 1. And if you're not familiar with who Josephus was a Jewish historian that worked for the Romans recording histories. And so Josephus actually lived shortly after the time of Christ. He was alive and witnessed, or potentially witnessed, the fall of Jerusalem as it happened, but he also could go to that site during his day and see what had happened at this location. And Josephus records that the entire city was demolished. The city, the temple, there was absolutely nothing left. There were only 3 things that were left, and it was these particular towers. And it was on the west side of the city, not the west side of the temple. And so when we're looking at a map of Jerusalem during this time frame, the walls had been extended. So when Jesus died, the walls were around this location. And then after Jesus died, they had to extend the walls further north because the city had just grown so much. But the 3 towers that Josephus is talking about is right in this central area here on the western wall of the city and right next to Herod's fortress. So this area that's highlighted in blue was Herod's fortress, and there was a series of walls right here where the old city met the new city portions. And so you had 3 towers that were located right here next to the wall of Herod's fortress. And so when they went in and they destroyed the city of Jerusalem, they wanted to leave a Roman mark. So they destroyed everything that was Israelite. They left the Roman towers and part of the wall for Herod's fortress, which was considered Roman, so that people who came to this location later on would know that they were the ones that the Romans had destroyed this and had literally, there's a verse in, I believe it's Micah, that says that Zion would be plowed like a field. And it literally was plowed like a field. There was nothing left. Some of the people that went through at a later date actually said, hey, you can't even tell that a city was there. Now, later on, the Romans went in and the Romans decided that they were going to build a city on the ruins of Jerusalem. They called it Aelia Capitolina. They dedicated it to the god Jupiter. They built a temple there. They dedicated the temple to Venus. And this temple is what is now the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So a lot of what we are seeing in Jerusalem now is actually the remnants from the Roman city that was built on the ruins of Jerusalem. And what you see with a lot of the ruins is that, hey, there's building materials here. Why go any further than we have to with these big, heavy rocks? Let's just use them and incorporate them into our own works. I mean, it makes sense. Why spend that money? So a lot of the stones were reused in some of the rebuilding efforts for the city, and this was not unusual. This is something that we see again and again and again. So the city that Jesus saw, totally and completely, utterly decimated. The city that existed by the Romans, that eventually was destroyed, not totally and completely. Some of the buildings still remain, as obvious, because of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But then another city was put on top of that, which then became, the Jerusalem, and it was destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt. So there's a lot of stuff that has been added. General vicinity of the temple, yes. Is it the actual wall for the temple? Based on scripture, based on first-hand accounts of people that lived during that time frame and people that lived in up to 300 and 500 years later, even 1,000 years later, they're saying that there was nothing there that was left. So I don't believe that it was there. Yes, Micah 3:12. Thank you, Heaven Soon. Well, it looks like we are at 9 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and finish out this program for tonight. If you have any questions, please do send them along. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. We now have TikTok. We started TikTok this week. You can go to our website to submit questions, or we can answer questions live next Friday night. Thank you for bearing with us as we dealt with audio issues tonight. It's new podcasts. There are bound to be some tech issues, and we will work through it together. Hope to see you tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific time. God bless. Have a good evening.